Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have a brand new legal breaking reporting and video analysis update, morning edition, as you can see here, by the New York Times. Let's get into it. Good morning. Here's the latest news. Ukrainians have shifted to supporting Ukraine, matching President Trump's reversal. Congress, the Senate advanced legislation that would rescind $9 billion for foreign aid and public broadcasting. Immigration. The U.S. resumed deportations to countries other than their own, sending 5 people to Eswatini in southern Africa. The Supreme Court cleared the practice. Afghanistan. Iran deported more than 1 million Afghans this year. Women and girls who fled the Taliban to work and study fear coming back to a cage. We have more below, but first we look at recent flooding and explain what you can do to stay safe. Ladies and gentlemen, the torrent. The rainfall the rainwater flowed into my central New Jersey home on Monday night. Tom Wright Percenti said, who's an editor for the morning newsletter. Carving the revolts across his floor that grew into streams and then ponds. His sump pump was quickly overmatched, so he was, so was his wetback. A second pump, which he had hoped would drain pooling water through a window, shot a grazer of brown basement liquid into his face. His battle against the elements left him with a sore back and a cellar full of sopping mementos, musical instruments, and holiday decorations. But he got off easy. The flash flood did far more damage just a few towns over, he said. He continued with, their roads became rivers. 2 people died when fast rising waters carried their car into a stream. Water has killed more people in my time as governor than any other sort of weather event, Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat, lamented yesterday. He blamed climate change. Many factors influence the weather, and scientists don't like to say that climate change caused this specific storm or that one, but researchers know that climate change is causing heavier rainfall in many storms. The warmer the atmosphere gets, the more moisture it can hold and release. Extreme rainstorms have become more common around the world. Last month has brought a rush of resulting floods. Over a single week, the water surged in New Mexico, Illinois, North Carolina, and Texas, where the deluge killed more than 130 people. Ladies and gentlemen, are you safe? Flash floods are the hardest disasters to prevent. What should you know about your neighborhood's flood risk? Claire Brown, who covers the climate, talked to explain about why you may be at more risk than you think, what you can do about it, and how local governments are adapting. FEMA's flood maps. Ladies and gentlemen, the agency publishes maps that inform zoning regulations and build standards. They also affect which homeowners have to buy flood insurance. Ladies and gentlemen, I will have a link down in the video description so you all can see your address below. But experts worry that these maps underestimate the risk of sudden and intense storms that lead to the rapid rise of rivers, such as the one that inundated Camp Mystic in Texas this month. By one estimate, more than twice as many properties are prone to once in a century flood as FEMA Maps suggest as many as 440,000 homes across the country may be uninsured for flood risk. Ladies and gentlemen, where else to look? Let's cover it. The government frequently updates maps of current and past floods and runs a water prediction service. The National Weather Service is refining a tool to visualize floods at street level. Real estate websites like Zillow, Redfin, and Realtor.com also use models from an independent research firm to share flood risk data on listings. Ladies and gentlemen, states adapt. Many are bolstering their warning systems and building infrastructure. New York City, for example, ladies and gentlemen, is building a 2.4-mile system of flood walls and floodgates designed to protect the east side of Manhattan. After thousands of Vermont residents lost homes and businesses in a 2023 flood, the state is improving its alert system, and many require homeowners to disclose past flood damage when they sell property. Sell property. It's also buying homes in floodplains and turns them into parkland. Ladies and gentlemen, more coverage. Florida and the Central Gulf Coast face a risk of flash flooding in the coming days. A summer camp, ladies and gentlemen, in Central Texas, serving disabled youths reopened rarely a week ago after the flooding. An army of volunteers helped it clean up. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest news. Firstly, let's cover the war in Ukraine. As Trump has pivoted and announced a plan to send weapons to Ukraine, some Republicans are contorting themselves to stay aligned with him. In the video, ladies and gentlemen, Maggie Haberman, who covers the White House, explains how Trump's position on Russia and Ukraine has changed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's try it again. If not, I'm gonna have to put a link down in the video description for you guys. and yet it's not working, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just put a link down in the video description for you guys, so you guys could watch it for your guys' selves. Ladies and gentlemen, Congress, let's cover it. Some Republican senators refused to support the move to rescind aid and public broadcast funds. J.D. Vance had to break the tie. PBS and NPR are pleading directly with lawmakers to shield them from more than $500 million a year in federal funding cuts. Josh Hawley, a senator from Missouri, introduced legislation to reverse some of the Medicaid cuts that he voted for as part of Trump's big policy bill 2 weeks ago. Epstein files, ladies and gentlemen. Let's cover them. House Democrats, capitalizing on a Republican rift, called for Trump and his regime and his officials to testify about their handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. The Republican breach over the Epstein saga hints at a broader fraying of Trump's political coalition. Annie Carney writes, last night, hosts covered Epstein and MAGA. Government overhaul, ladies and gentlemen, let's cover it. The Health and Human Services Department finished firing thousands of employees after a Supreme Court cleared the way for mass government layoffs. Ridiculous. The Justice Department, ladies and gentlemen, wants to undo civil service and whistleblower protections so it can fire career law enforcement officials without cause. Israel, ladies and gentlemen. Some of Benjamin Netanyahu's political allies quit his government over a proposal to make ultra-Orthodox religious students serve in the Israeli military. The Israeli military struck government forces in Syria, and the Iranian-backed Hezbollah, Hezbollah militia in Lebanon. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel said it was securing its northern border. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. ambassador to Israel urged an investigation into the killing of a Palestinian American during a clash with Israeli settlers in the West Bank, calling it a terrorist attack. Ladies and gentlemen, China, let's cover it. Beijing, Beijing, is spending billions of dollars to become an AI superpower. China will restrict use of its battery-making technology in other countries, which could cement its lead in electric vehicle production. Ladies and gentlemen, other big stories. The Trump regime released around half of the National Guard troops it deployed to Los Angeles during last month's protests. Federal officials rarely penalize for profit rehab hospitals for grave errors that hurt patients, an investigation found. Inflation accelerated slightly last month. Prices rose more for the products more affected by tariffs, like furniture and appliances. Ladies and gentlemen, the New York mayor's race. Let's cover it. The Times recently invited readers to send questions about Zohran Mahmoodi's decisive win in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary. We've highlighted one below. You can find many more here. I will have a link, ladies and gentlemen, down below in the video description, about both local and national issues. How does Mahmoodi's race and subsequent win reflect the overall picture of politics, especially the identity of the Democratic Party going into November and beyond? Samantha Kaplan, Annapolis, Minnesota, ladies and gentlemen. Lisa Learer, a national political correspondent, explains. There's a long and storied history of overinterpreting the New York elections, she said, as barometers of the national mood. Just ask Eric Adams, who heralded once himself as the Biden of Brooklyn, or ask Bill de Blasio, Blasio, about his very brief presidential campaign. As one prominent Democrat put it to her, ladies and gentlemen, recently, the party should spend more time thinking about Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, about the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, than the Upper West Side. The most competitive midterm races will largely take place in more moderate areas of the country, so she would not explain many Democratic candidates to embrace Democratic Socialists' positions. More likely is that candidates will try to emulate Mamundi's effective use of social media, and perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, his intense focus on affordability, an issue that resonates everywhere. As she last month wrote, there are some signs, early signs if that Mamundi's win could inspire some younger Democrats to challenge older incumbents in primaries. It comes as many voters are desperate for generational change after watching their leaders dismiss their concerns about Joe Biden's age. We plan to continue answering questions, ladies and gentlemen, in New York Today's in the New York Today newsletter until the election in November. Submit your questions here. Ladies and gentlemen, I will have a link in the video description. And sign up here, ladies and gentlemen. I will also have a link in the video description to get that newsletter delivered to your inbox. For more, ladies and gentlemen, Mamundi's group told Mamundi told a group of business leaders that he would discourage use of the phrase globalize the Intifada, a cry rallying for opponents of the war in Gaza that has been seen as a sell to violence against Jews. Andrew Cuomo, who will run as an independent against Mamundi, is test driving a warmer, friendlier version of himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I will have a link down in the video description if you want to read his interview with the Times. Ladies and gentlemen, opinions. Public media is a public service. To abandon it would take away nonpartisan local news that the private sector can't provide. The editorial board writes. Here's a column of Brett Stevens on Mamundi. Ladies and gentlemen, I will have a link in the video description. Ladies and gentlemen, everything the Times offers all in one subscription. Morning readers save an unlimited access to the Times with the introductory, ladies and gentlemen, offer. I will have a link in the video description below. Ladies and gentlemen, morning reads. Bigger and weirder. Ladies and gentlemen, click the image above to see Weird AI Weird Al Yankovic's first ever Madison Square performance. Ladies and gentlemen, stubborn visitor. A popular New York hiking trail had to close for a month because of a moose that wouldn't leave. Ladies and gentlemen, your pick. The most clickable article, clicked article in the morning yesterday explored the pros and cons of Benadryl. Ladies and gentlemen, lives lived. Andrea Gibson was a master of spoken word poetry who cultivated legions of admirers with intensely personal, often political works exploring gender, love, and a 4-year fight with terminal ovarian cancer. Gibson unfortunately died at 49. Ladies and gentlemen, time for sports. MLB, a wild all-star game, featured a homage of Clayton Kershaw, a first-of-its-kind home run swing off to decide the winner, and an MVP award for the Phillies slugger Kyle Schwarber. Ladies and gentlemen, WNBA. Caitlin Clark injured her groin in last night's game against the Connecticut Sun. Ladies and gentlemen, Emmy nominations. These are the Emmy nominations. Severance, 27 nominations. The Penguin, 24 nominations. The Studio, 23 nominations. The White Lotus, also 23 nominations. The Last of Us, 16 nominations. Hacks, 14 nominations. Apple TV Plus may not be many people's streaming platform of choice, but yesterday's Emmy nominations were good to it. Severance, in its dystopian workplace drama, earned 27 nominations, the most for many series. Seth Rogen's The Studio, also from Apple TV Plus, picked up 23 tying nominations, a record for a comedy. Here are some other highlights. The former ER star Noah Weil capped his comeback with a Best Drama Actor, nominated for his role in the medical drama The Pit. It was one of 13 for the show. Adolescence, ladies and gentlemen, a British show that stirred political debate about teenage social media use in its home country and became a hit for Netflix, was nominated for the Best Limited Series. Forecasters say it's the favorite. Colin Farrell, ladies and gentlemen, prosthetics in The Penguin paid off. He was nominated for the Best Actor in a Limited Series or TV movie. Ladies and gentlemen, trending, let's cover it. People online were searching for this year's nominees. See the full list here. Ladies and gentlemen, the morning recommends achieve near instant joy with 2-ingredient mango soft serve. Travel ultra light. Use a melon baller on more than just melons. Ladies and gentlemen, games. Here is today's spelling bee. Yesterday's pangram was beachcomb. And here are today's mini crossword wordle connections, sports connections, and strands. Thanks for spending part of your morning with the Times. See you tomorrow. Sign up here to get this newsletter in your mailbox. Reach out to the team at themorning@newyorktimes.com.